Hello and welcome to another We Love Knitting tutorial. I'm Claire and today I'll be teaching you to knit 2 socks at a time from the toe up using Judy's Magic Cast On. If you haven't knit socks with Magic Loop before, or you just want to refresh your memory before attempting to knit 2 at a time, I suggest watching my previous video on Magic Loop, which will get you to where you need to be for this tutorial. There's a link in the description. This video has been made especially for the We Love Knitting Sock Club, but it's useful to everyone, so please feel free to watch even if you aren't a member. If you're interested in joining the sock club, we'd love to have you. It's lots of fun and you'll get an exclusive skein of yarn each month. You'll get discounts on patterns and sometimes freebies, as well as tutorials like this one to help you create something beautiful with your yarn. You can find more information on my website or on Instagram. I'll put links in the description. Now let's get started with the tutorial. Okay, so first I'm going to use these socks that are already on the needles to explain the basic concept of knitting 2 socks at a time Magic Loop. So we have each sock with its own ball of yarn. So what you will do is you will knit across the front of one sock, and then you'll move to the next sock, knit across the front, and then you'll flip for Magic Loop and you'll knit across the back of that sock and then across the back of this sock. So it's the same except you're doing the front of both and then the back of both. And you just need to make sure that your balls of yarn don't get tangled and that you don't accidentally start knitting with this strand onto this sock, because that's where you'll come into trouble, but otherwise it's very simple. Alright, so let's get into it and learn how to do Judy's Magic Cast On. Okay, so I've got my 2 cakes of yarn which I've divided evenly. I've got my circular needle with a nice long cord. You will need a long cord for this because you need to fit 2 socks on here, so make sure that you've got enough space. I used 80 centimeters, but you could also use 100. Okay, so let's get started with Judy's Magic Cast On. Alright, so you pick up the needles like this, so that both tips are pointing to the left and the cord is coming out to the right. You hold it with your right hand like this with both tips even. Now you pick up your yarn from one of your cakes and leave a tail, because this is a type of long tail cast on, so you will be using the tail for the cast on. Now to start, you can do it 2 ways. You can either do a slip knot and place the slip knot on the needle furthest away from you. That's the easier way to do it, but the way I like to do it is to just place the yarn over the top of the needle like this without a knot. I think that it gives a neater result in the end. It's just a little bit more fiddly to work with. And if you're new to this, maybe start with a slip knot. But if you're up for a challenge, then do it this way, because it does have a nicer result in the end. So what we do now is we pick up the yarn like we would for a long tail cast on. Thumb and forefinger together. If you haven't done a slip knot, you'll need to place your finger on the yarn so that it doesn't slip out. Thumb and forefinger together and pick up the yarn like this, just like for a long tail cast on. Okay, so now to start the cast on, what we do is we get the yarn that's going to our forefinger and we bring it underneath both needles and up over the top of the needle closest to us and through the center. And we've created another stitch on the needle. So the next thing we do is we get the yarn coming to our thumb. We go underneath both needles, up over the back of the needle furthest away from us and through the center. and we've created another stitch on that needle. And so we keep alternating doing exactly this until we have our required number of stitches. So forefinger underneath both needles, up and over the needle closest to us and through the center. Thumb up underneath and over the needle furthest from us and through the center. Forefinger under and over the top and through the center. And so you can see this pattern here, we just keep going like this. And so our pattern will say cast on, say 16 stitches, and you will want 8 on each needle. So you're going to have half on each. So you just keep going until you've got the right amount. Okay, so I've got my 16 stitches, 8 on each. All right, now what we do is we just leave that to hang like that, and we slide it down the needle just out of the way, and that's the cast on for one of our socks done. Now we do the next one in exactly the same way with our other cake of yarn. And it's easiest if you make sure that your needles are level, and you'll get the hang of this pretty quickly. It's a great cast on. I'll show you how it looks. So I used it for this pair of socks here. The cast on is actually here. It's completely invisible, and you work outwards from the center. So there's the cast on here, and you work outwards like this. And to create that toe, all we've done is increases up the sides, and it's all closed up like a nice little pocket. And here is the first stitch, which I did as just placing the yarn over. If you have a slip knot, I think it leaves a little bit of a hole, but this method there's no hole, so that's why I suggest doing it like this, even though it's slightly more difficult to manage. Okay, so I'll just keep going with this until I've got my required number of stitches. Okay, there we go. I've got 16 stitches cast on for both socks, and I'm ready to start knitting. So what we do now is we turn our needles over into the working position, which is this way. Now make sure that you flip your balls or cakes of yarn over so that they don't get twisted and tangled, especially at the start, because this is the most fiddly for the first few rows, and it's best if you're just careful with your yarn to make sure that it doesn't tangle up. But you'll start to see how it's working as you go along, and it will become very easy. Okay, so what we do now is we pull out the bottom needle just like we would for magic loop. And we're going to work with this needle. So the way that I've done it without the slip knot, you have to actually use that tail to secure that first stitch, because it's actually just sort of sitting over the needle like that. It's not actually a stitch. So You use the tail by pulling it in this direction. And that tail will just lock that stitch on there. But again, if this is too tricky for you and you just want something easy, just do a slip knot and you won't have this problem. Now make sure that you're working with your working yarn and not your tail by mistake. And now what we do is we just knit across the row like normal. And if you've done it the way I have without a slip knot, this first stitch will try to come loose, and you can see as I go to knit into it, it just pulls on the tail. So that will become secure in the next row. Don't worry about it for this row if it seems to be loose, a loose stitch. It does tighten up in the next row. So I'm just knitting across like normal. Okay, so I've knit across the row, which is half of a round for this sock. Now I just move that down the needle and out of the way and do exactly the same thing for the next sock. Okay, so I've done that for both socks. Now I'm going to turn my work just like we normally would for magic loop, making sure to move the balls of yarn to the other side so that they don't get tangled. And now, just like we would normally do for magic loop, we put this needle onto the stitches and we pull this one out. Okay, so for this row, which is the second half of the round for Judy's magic cast on, what we need to do is we start by knitting the first stitch normally. But then, for the rest of the stitches on the row, we actually need to knit them through the back loop, because the way that the cast on is done means that these stitches are twisted. So you could just knit them like normally, but then you'll have twisted stitches. So if you knit them through the back loop, they will be sitting on your needle like normal, untwisted. So we just go through, and it's just for this first row, or first round, second half of the first round, we knit all of the stitches through the back loop. And there we go. You can see that we're getting a little piece of fabric here. This will be the cast on in the middle and we'll be working outwards. Okay, so let's push this one to the side and move to the next one. And exactly the same thing for the next one. Okay, so now I've completed the first round for both socks of Judy's magic cast on. And now it depends on what your pattern says. The pattern that I'm using says knit the next round, so I don't need to do any increases on this round. but just check what your pattern says. And now we're just effectively working in rounds like we normally would. But as you can see from this sock again, we've started with a closed seamless cast on and we're working out in both directions. So one needle is this side and the other needle is this side. And these are the increases up the side. So I hope that that helped. I hope that you understand how to do Judy's Magic Cast On and knit 2 socks at a time. If you have any more questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm happy to help. Okay, good luck.